Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife Digital Open House. I'm Mike Livingston, the South Central Washington Regional Director for the department, and I'll be moderating this virtual meeting tonight. I'm joined by our director, Kelly Susewind. Good evening, Kelly. Also from the department, we have with us tonight, Region 3 Wildlife Program Manager, Dr. Scott McCorkindale, District Fish Biologist Paul Hofarth, and Cynthia Wilkerson with our Lands Division. They'll be here to help us with the question and answer session that we'll have later this evening. Tonight also, we're honored to have two key partner organizations joining us. I'm excited to welcome from Forterra, President and CEO Michelle Connor and Land Manager Collette MacLean. Michelle, would you please tell us a little bit about Forterra?
Absolutely. It's really an honor to be here tonight with Department of Fish and Wildlife and with Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. For those of you joining us tonight, Forterra is a statewide conservation organization that really focuses on caring for people and land to sustain a place where all of us can thrive, whether that's elk or salmon or all of us human beings. And we do that work through real estate, finance, fundraising, and community engagement. So it's really an honor to be here tonight and really super excited to hear from everybody, including our nonprofit partners, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
Thank you, Michelle. I am equally excited to be joined by our Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation partner and the Director of Lands, Jennifer Doherty, and Senior Lands Manager for Oregon and Washington, Bill Richardson. Jennifer, hey, would you please tell us a little bit about the Elk Foundation?
You bet. Thank you, Mike. And I'd echo Michelle's comments. It is delightful to be here and celebrating a great success story amongst our partners and sharing that with the public. So the Elk Foundation is honored to be here and honored to be a part of this project. For those of you who don't know much about us, we started in 1984 and our nationwide conservation organization dedicated to protecting elk and other wildlife. And we do that work through habitat protection, land protection, hunting heritage, and of course advocating for elk themselves and the elk hunter. So this project, as we'll learn more about it, this project just hits all of those things on the head, and we're delighted to be part of the celebration.
Thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. And it is really exciting to talk about a project that we just finished up recently, which we'll get into the details of that here shortly. So just a little bit of housekeeping here. So following the presentation and discussion, we'll begin the question and answer portion of the event. We're scheduled to run till 8 p.m. However, if the questions keep coming in, we can run a bit longer. We would like to invite the audience to submit questions now and throughout the meeting. So there's a Q&A window on the black controls bar at the bottom of your screens. The questions will be reviewed by our moderators and brought forward later this evening for us to answer. You can choose to send those responses anonymously if you wish by clicking the Send Anonymously box. I wanted to thank you again for participating. We're going to work through as many of the questions as we get to those tonight and appreciate you being with us. So now I'm going to turn it over to Director Kelly Susewind for some opening remarks. Take it away, Kelly.
Thank you, Mike. I'll be merciful and keep it pretty short here so we can get on with the main part of the agenda. First, a big shout out and thank you to everybody for joining us, whether you're joining this live tonight or watching the recording later. 2020 is the year that just keeps on giving. And so we know folks have plenty on their plate and plenty on their mind, and really appreciate and are thankful that you were able to carve out the time to spend some of it with us to hear about some of the issues going on, particularly there in the Region 3. I would also be remiss if I didn't offer my condolences for the tragic losses associated with the wildfires. This region in particular was hit hard. Devastating effects in a occurrence that's happening way too often, and it's likely to keep that way for a long time. So again, my condolences. And in a sad way, though, it's a good segue to highlight the need for how we can address some of those issues, and that's through partnerships like we're going to talk about tonight. That when I think about my time on the job, going on a couple of years now, or just over a couple of years now, I came in thinking, man, climate change, population, and I still think those are really the things that are going to drive us going in the future. We had a discussion this morning, and I realized that. So I know I'm getting a little long in the tooth, but not that long. Since I graduated from high school, the population of the state has doubled, just shy of doubled, but effectively doubled. And I project that on the young adults coming out of school today and think, boy, not in their lifetime, but just in their working careers, we could see another doubling. If I look back at what the last doubling did and look what the next one does, and it's going to be double of that, we better be on our game for putting people on the landscape in a smart way and protecting what we have. That's exacerbated by climate change. Again, when I was coming out of high school, that was an obscure concept talked about by scientists and extremists. Now we're living it every day, and we're on the beginning curve of that. And so the best way to deal with those is through partnerships like you're going to hear about tonight, unique partnerships. They seem unique to maybe the outside world, but these are partners we've worked with in a lot of venues and have great success with. Partnerships are the tool that will allow us to address this. Nobody's going to be able to do this on their own. No organization, no governmental body. It's going to take all of us. In that 360-degree view for partnerships, look where you might not expect there's probably a great partnership there. It leverages not only resources, obviously the more people you bring to the table, the more resources you have, but almost more importantly, it leverages interest. When you sit across from a group you didn't think you had anything in common with and realize you have way more in common than you have in differences, and you can really constructively work together, it builds this synergistic effect. And so that's how we're going to get the focus on this, societal focus that's going to take it. Again, 2020, a lot going on in the world. It'd be easy to lose focus on the environmental issues that we need to keep track of if we're going to maintain the lifestyle that we have here in the Northwest that identifies who we are and why most of us are here. So I look forward to hearing from our partners. I've already violated my promise not to spend too long talking, so I'm going to turn it back over to Mike, I believe, to host this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. You didn't go too long. That was good. Thanks. Appreciate those words. Okay, so tonight's short presentation and discussion is going to be about 25 minutes long, if that, and is going to focus on the importance of land conservation to support fish, wildlife, and outdoor activities. Also, while maintaining things like working lands, things for the local community values. We're going to use a recent land acquisition project as an example of how we protect land for future generations through partnerships. And that theme of partnerships and land conservation is what we're about tonight. So just a little bit of background first. Region 3 includes Kittitas, Yakima, Benton, and Franklin counties. And we manage over 400,000 acres of state land in the region, including the Clockham, the LT Murray, Weenass, Oak Creek, Sunnyside, and the Snake River wildlife areas. We also co-manage the Teanaway Community Forests with the Department of Natural Resources. And these lands, they provide habitat for many species and also many outdoor pursuits. You can imagine, and for those of you who do get out on these lands, you can see just the diversity of interest that people have for getting outside nowadays, whether it's mountain biking, rock climbing, hunting and fishing and hiking and bird watching. There's just so many different things that people enjoy. We manage a green dot road system where people use motorized vehicles to get into the backcountry too. And all of these activities are supported through the partnerships that we have with the folks on the call tonight. When the department first started buying land in the region several decades ago, it was to provide big game wintering habitat, especially for elk. These originally purchased lands like the Oak Creek Wildlife Area and the new ones that we acquire provide habitat for a diversity of species and outdoor uses, as well as important wintering habitat for big game. So that original purpose is still achieved, but there's been a recognition of the need for these other large challenges that we face. Kelly mentioned climate change. Also providing water protection. You know, the watershed is really crucial in Eastern Washington in particular, as well as across the state. And these projects can do that type of, accomplish that type of goal. So the South Fork Kaiwichi project, which is the formerly known as the Van White Ranch, is a recent example we did to protect important land and to accomplish all these different goals and values. We partnered with the Elk Foundation and Forterra to get it accomplished just last year in 2019. I have a few images to show here to orient you to the project. So I'm going to open up and share my screen. And I'm looking for a thumbs up from somebody on camera that says they can see it. Excellent, thank you. So this project was is west of the city of Yakima by about 15 miles. It's in the yellow here on the screen. It's about 7 square miles and encompassed nearly 4,500 acres. So it's a fairly large project. The other thing that's really important about the project is its location. You'll notice that it's right in between other public lands. So to the east, we have the Kaiwichi unit of the Oak Creek Wildlife Area. To the west, we also have state DNR land as well as the Oak Creek Wildlife Area. And further to the west, you have the U.S. Forest Service. It's really important to note this connection between these existing parcels of land as we talk a little bit further about the importance of the area. Wanted to just highlight some of the diversity of habitat. So there's ponderosa pine and Oregon white oak out there. There's shrub steppe. There's stream and riparian habitat. The property really pretty much has it all. And even in the cooler north-facing draws, you have Doug fir and mixed conifers. So it's just a variety of habitats, and that's why one of the reasons why this ranch was so important to protect, and our partners are going to talk a little bit about that too. One of the key things that, you know, from the department's perspective as far as managing a large elk herd, so the Yakima Elk Herd varies somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 elk. They have a migratory pattern between winter and summer range. And I mentioned the proximity of this property to existing public land. So on the where we have winter highlighted here, that area is the Oak Creek unit where we actually feed elk to stop them from going further into the agricultural zone. And then as the winter subsides, they migrate across the Van White Ranch, the South Fork Kaiwichi project, and head into the upper elevations. And so you can see just naturally, this is such an important project to accomplish. All those blue dots are radio collared locations that from an elk study that was done years ago. And it really highlights the importance of the proximity of this project to managing the elk herd that we do. There's about up to 2,000 elk on a heavy winter that migrate across this landscape. One other component that I just wanted to highlight is the importance is the connectivity to public land for the recreating public, whether you're a hunter or a hiker or a bird watcher. There's one primary road that leads in there. It leads off of the Kaiwichi Mill Road and then heads into the Forest Service and DNR lands beyond. And over the years, there's been moments when the opportunity to access that road was threatened. And there's a real important value there of maintaining that access that we were after. And so through protecting the land, we've actually maintained that access. People have been using it for generations to get up into the forest for various activities throughout the year. So this was just one of those really, there was just so many between habitat diversity, the elk migration patterns, as well as public access that really made us excited about this project. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I just wanted to close out this little bit of the presentation and say that when we were approached by the owner to buy this land, we realized that the state cannot always move as quick as we need to, and we need partners to help us negotiate and talk about different outcomes that we could have for conservation. That's where the Elk Foundation initially really stepped in, and I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer and to Bill with the Elk Foundation to tell us a little bit more about their conservation work, and then dive a little bit deeper into how the Van Wyck project became a reality.
Thank you, Mike. This is Jennifer from the Elk Foundation, and I'd love to chime in here, and then I'm going to give Bill Richardson a chance to really take a deeper dive into this particular landscape. For those of you that were on in the beginning of the call and heard, you know, the mission of the Elk Foundation, why we exist, why we started this organization in 1984, I think it's really easy to see the benefits for elk in this landscape, as Mike has highlighted. So RMEF's interest in this general area, this larger landscape that you saw on that map, really started about 20 years ago, just from recognizing the significance of that landscape for elk as they migrate, as they calve, as they winter, and then also for the public, for the general public and recreational pursuits, as Director Susewind mentioned this morning or earlier today. So obviously just a very significant landscape for us, and in Washington, in a state where we have large elk herds like the Yakima Elk Herd, it was an area that we zeroed in on, and we're able to partner with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and others to fulfill our mission through habitat work, through land protection work, hunting heritage, and a variety of other types of projects. I couldn't be more thrilled to enter the picture and continue that trend. We talked about partnerships earlier, and obviously partnerships are built on trust, and they're built on you know, individual relationships and getting work done successfully on the ground. And I think that this project really highlights the Elk Foundation's partnership with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife through habitat and land protection work, as well as public access. Now, I want to comment on Forterra as well, as that is not an entity we've partnered with a lot in the past. And this project really highlighted the benefits of multiple partnerships coming together for that mutual interest, which we definitely have. There's huge synergy there, and that was highlighted and celebrated throughout this project. I think we'll get into some other species here in a minute, but elk being generalists, it's kind of fun to look into, you know, the butterflies and all the other species that this project really supported and helped to protect. One last thing I want to mention is just you cannot overstate this landscape and the connectivity. The work that's been done over the last couple decades to really create this unfragmented, you know, connected piece for wildlife to roam and people to navigate as they go off on their recreational pursuits through hunting or bird watching, photography, whatever it is. There's something for everyone out here, and it's allowing the agency, this type of work will allow the agency to truly manage our herds and our wildlife in a sustainable manner. So compliments to both Forterra and our partners at Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife on this success story. I think it's truly something to be celebrated. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Bill Richardson, who's our Senior Lands Program Manager in the area, and he can dive into further details.
Thank you, Jennifer. So this is just a fantastic landscape. And as Mike said, the importance of winter range and keeping elk where elk can be secure and not causing damage, not because you can really have impacts from too many elk or elk in the wrong places. And so this is what this is all about, as well as keeping houses from growing in elk country so that elk have that movement and ability to migrate. In addition to elk, so a lot of the work we do, it's all about elk. We focus on elk, but it's other wildlife that drives what we do, and it especially drives fundraising. And so one of the things about this landscape is elk migrate elevationally to summer range and back down to winter range on the lower elevations. Butterflies do that as well. So believe it or not, butterflies was a key species. There's over 70 species of butterfly that use this landscape. And as we've been researching this and through our partners with the local universities, those butterflies actually migrate elevationally as well. So they're following the green up in the spring, and then they're following the green up or the senescence back down in the fall, and that's their life cycle. So once again, as we've seen so many times before, when you're doing good things for elk, you're doing good things for other wildlife. Other species that are migrating are salmon and steelhead. This is a huge critical landscape for anadromous fish. And so that was just it just compounds and builds. I want to talk a little bit about, so Mike mentioned about access, and there's two ways to look at access on this project. So one way is that you've got a mainline road where hunters, recreationists could get up to other public lands at higher elevations. But there's also the non-roaded access, and this project was really unique for me in that it was the least roaded project that I've ever worked on with the Elk Foundation. There was less than 3/4 of a mile of road per square mile in this landscape. So again, very ideal for elk, butterflies, western gray squirrels. Some of the only instances of western gray squirrels returning to the landscape. They've been gone for over 30 years, and they showed up on game cameras, and they're right here on this project. So that's a really cool thing. And then I kind of want to close with talking about the legacy of the Van Wyck family, because they didn't have to do this. They didn't have to sell to the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and Forterra. They could have chosen other development scenarios that probably would have garnered them more revenue down the road, but they had a conservation basis for them, and really this is their legacy. They grazed this ground for almost 100 years with the Van Wyck family, and that grazing, that sustainable management shaped the landscape and put it in a condition that is very sustainable and intact. It's functioning. Again, when you've got species like butterflies and elk and deer and cougars, golden eagles, I could go on and on about the species that use this property, but the connectivity it provides for the Van Wyck family, this was part of their legacy to pass this on to future generations so that it's available for all, and most importantly, available for wildlife. And with that, I'll turn it back to Mike.
Thank you, Bill. Really appreciate that from Elk Foundation. The diversity of species that was mentioned is just phenomenal. When we had our biologists start working on this, they just, I remember talking to them after they went out a few times to just sort of walk the property, finally had permission from the landowner to do that. And they just said, every time we go out there, we're just astounded at the health of the habitat, despite the, there's a legacy of grazing. And like Bill said, it's been in excellent condition. Those ranchers have did a fantastic job of maintaining the plant community and did it in a very sustainable way. There's elk calving right along the creek and next to the road. You can hear the young elk in there. And so there's just a diversity. Every time you go in there, you see something different. So I appreciate those comments. Now I'm going to let Michelle from Forterra speak to her organization's connection to this work, and take it away, Michelle.
For sure. And I want to introduce Collette MacLean, our land steward, and just acknowledge that when stewardship work becomes the next step on the project, Collette will play a key role in it. But to roll back to what Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and Jen and Bill personally did with this, as well as Department of Fish and Wildlife, was to stick with this property. for more than 20 years, and to build a relationship of trust with a landowner whose family had cared deeply about the land, and to demonstrate a similar commitment to this place, to this extraordinary place. And I just can't emphasize enough that for a nonprofit, whether it's Forterra or Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, to stick with a property for that long requires the sustained support of their stakeholders. And the same for the agency. You know, finding the right time when it made the right sense for the family and the family had the confidence to do the transaction was just absolutely critical. In this case, the role that Forterra was able to play was to bring some real estate resources and some bequest funding from a hunter who wanted to make sure that future hunters and fishers would have access to the lands that he loved. And so we were able to bring some of those resources to bear on this property. And in furtherance of his request, we have agreed to make a stewardship commitment to support Department of Fish and Wildlife, Cowiche Canyon Conservancy, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and others to ensure that over the long haul, we make a contribution towards the stewardship of this landscape. And while our involvement has been in this one piece for a very short amount of time relative to the history and heritage that Rocky Mountain Elk and DFW bring to it, we're committed to being a partner going forward. And I think one of the interesting roles for those of you who live in Region 3 is that as a West Side-based organization, with our main stakeholder base being in, call it the greater Seattle, greater Puget Sound region, part of the role we can play is to be an advocate and a liaison and an educator to urban residents about the heritage of hunting, fishing, land management, farming, the engagement in the landscape that many of you have on the east side of the mountains, and to share that love and understanding of that love with urban residents who may be new to our region, and have them really appreciate that. And that's, I think, one of the things we can do going forward as an ally to this effort, as well as, you know, maybe encouraging people to come out and visit the landscape, and doing so in a way that doesn't necessarily draw them to this property, but maybe it's encouraging them to go on the Kaiwichi, you know, Conservancy property nearby, or some other trail system that's developed, because this landscape is all connected and each piece of the land plays a part of that. And maybe that also includes stopping at the local restaurant and enjoying some of the other local businesses that are in the area, and drawing some of the economic support that makes it possible for the region to support these lands. So with that, I'll just stop there and say, you know, how beautiful this landscape is. And it's something that for West Side Washingtonians, you know, to know that it's there and that it's being well cared for, and also to acknowledge the challenges that the region's facing, whether that's because of the fires or just, you know, the economic and health challenges of our current situation with the pandemic. People on the West Side care, and care deeply.
Thank you, Michelle, for that. So I think that there's a theme here that we're hearing tonight that we were intentional about, and that partnership theme, and I think is something that was mentioned a little bit earlier, but I think it's worth repeating. It may seem a bit odd, this partnership that we've formed with Elk Foundation and Forterra to get this work done. You know, the Elk Foundation's based in Missoula, Montana, works across the country on largely elk centric projects, but there's a ton of other species and public access that comes along with that. And some might view the organization as like just a hunting organization. Forterra, based in Seattle, Western Washington, works on habitat and recreation and community connections across the state. Some may view them as largely hiking environmental organization, but what we hopefully are demonstrating here is there's a common thread, and that's the land conservation, the connection to the land. Whether, you know, we're doing this to benefit an imperiled species or big game species or hikers or hunters, that common goal is something that we can all rally around. And I think it's something that we absolutely must rally around in order to prepare ourselves for as the future unfolds related to climate change. And also just, you know, we're growing fast. Director Susewind talks about the 7 million people and more coming to the state. It's just an amazing set of challenges that we have in front of us, but doing projects like this through partnership is the way we're going to be able to address that going forward. The other thing that Michelle mentioned that I wanted to hit on really quick is in the Kaiwichi in particular, we have a local land trust, the Kaiwichi Canyon Conservancy, that's an excellent partner for us. And the butterfly work that Bill mentioned was something that they started with partnership with WSU and did some of that really groundbreaking work about the 70 different butterfly species. They do a bunch of youth education out there for that kind of work, and it's connecting people to the land right here locally. And it's a really great another opportunity. And they provide really important places for people to go hiking on. Right next to the Oak Creek Wildlife Area, the Cowiche unit, is the Snow Mountain Ranch. And a lot of people like to enjoy the trails out there. So all of this kind of centering around land conservation and the need to, and to be strategic where we go and do acquisitions and protection, but where we do, both the fish and wildlife that benefit and the people, and we see that every day. With that, I'm going to let Kelly summarize some of what he heard, and then we'll move into our Q&A part of tonight's event. Take it away, Kelly.
Doing my Marcel interpretation. Unmute myself. I think folks have said it really well. We're talking about, in this particular case, a spectacular piece of ground, both from diversity of species, connectivity. It's in the shape it's in because of the long-term stewardship of the family. So let's recognize that, and that you can manage in a way that's protective and be a good steward. Also, then the ethic of the family to allow it to be retained in those conditions for the public. And then the unique combination, or what seems to be a unique combination here, of different organizations, different perceptions of those organizations, be they accurate or not, but both stepping up to the plate and combining and getting that synergistic effect I talked about earlier. It's exactly the kind of things that we need to be working on. And so again, great demonstration of that, and looking forward to this and other acquisitions. I think it's important too that we talk about, we're trying to maintain local character. We're trying to make sure we keep money coming into the local economy, meaning through the potential loss of taxes. Not everybody's wild about public land ownership. We need to be responsible and show we can do it in a responsible way. So that's what I heard. It's a great success story, and it's a great time to hear of a success story. Thanks to our partners.
Thank you, Kelly. So just a reminder for the Q&A session, you can submit questions now, and hopefully people have been throughout the Q&A period here. You'll find a Q&A window on the black controls bar at the bottom of the screen. The questions will be reviewed by our moderators and brought forward as they come in, and you can choose to send the responses either anonymously or leave your name on there. If you wish to be an anonymous, you can click on the anonymous box. But I want to thank you for participating. We will get through as many of the questions as we can, and thanks for being with us. So let's see. So the first Q&A question is from David. Can you describe the roles and responsibilities of each organization in the project and how they coordinate their efforts? So I'll start a little bit here, and there's two phases to a project like this. There's the acquisition piece, which is the discussion with the landowners and the finding the resources, the funds to make the acquisition, to make sure it fits our strategic planning. There's a whole internal process that Cynthia Wilkerson oversees in the agency for making sure that we're purchasing land that fits into WDFW's goals and objectives for land conservation. We turn down more projects than we accept as far as our efforts to go and try and purchase them. So, so there's the acquisition component, and then there's the stewardship component. And on the acquisition, Department of Fish and Wildlife's responsibility was to work on grants to put towards the acquisition of this. Since that time, and we came up with a variety of funding sources, including some from the Recreation Conservation Office, WWRP, which our partners help us to prepare and get photos and do that. And then also there's the presentations that got to be made. We also got money through a Section 6 grant that's managed through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for threatened and endangered species. So those are two sources of funding. And then it got rolled into the Oak Creek Wildlife Area. So the department will be managing it along with the other lands in the Oak Creek. And we have our wildlife area managers, Scott McCorkindale, who's on here tonight to answer some questions, possibly supervises the staff. I'm going to turn it over to Elk Foundation to just mention what their role and responsibility here is.
So we've had this long-standing effort in this, the east slope of the Cascades. I think we've protected mostly with WDFW, although we have partnered with Washington Department of Natural Resources and other partners as well. But I think there's approaching 150,000 acres of permanently protected landscape. And it's so important for wildlife. And I think Washingtonians, and I know that WDFW really understand that unless there's places for wild critters, that humans are going to lose out on the landscape as well. So we've got to have those things. We've got to keep systems intact. And that follows through, as I mentioned before, with the family. And I think that was the key to when we made a couple runs at this project before, or in fact, several runs. I think we probably had it on our list for a couple of decades. And so when the Van Wyck family wanted to re-engage, Mike and his helpers called us in, and we met with the family. We established a relationship. This is all about relationships. And we had a solid relationship with the Van Wyck family. We did have some rough spots. It's a negotiation like anything else, but we got through it and reached our goal. And I think that's because we all trusted each other and had that solid relationship to go forward.
Thanks, Bill. Michelle, would you like to add in?
Sure. So you could say that Bill provided front of house services to work with the family, understand the family's needs, and what Forterra stepped in was to provide real estate support in conjunction with Department of Fish and Wildlife, and ultimately to structure the transaction to meet the timing needs of the family slightly ahead of when the department had funds available. So we provided gap resources to get the deal done on a time schedule that worked for the family, to provide the family with certainty that the transaction ultimately would come together, and then facilitated a smooth handoff to the department as their grants came together and their approvals came together. And then going forward, we've made a commitment to help promote the stewardship goals of the general area according to the habitat and recreation and hunting plans that Department of Fish and Wildlife puts together, and to bring new constituents to appreciate the property and support the department in taking good care of it for all the historical and traditional uses, including hunting and fishing.
Thank you, Michelle. So let's see, I'm going to go to the next question. In establishing safe habitat and migration routes for elk, are we looking at year-round closures or seasonal closures like what we see with Central Oregon and their seasonal deer closures? I might call a friend on this and let Scott McCorkindale answer this, and then also we'll, if the Elk Foundation or Forterra wants to add to that. But Scott?
Yeah. So closures in that context are all about sort of managing disturbance, which can have negative impacts on particularly large mammals over winter. The best fit is, I think, still to be determined. The kinds of closures we typically have around here, we have winter closures that surround most of the sort of near habitat that's around the places where we winter feed elk, where we give them hay, again, to reduce disturbance and let those animals settle in. And then also as they begin to sort of drift away in the spring, it just provides them a little bit of security and keeps them from getting disturbance and sort of running off fat that they really need. So there are other places that we have different kinds of closures, like we have one up in the which is not tied to a winter feeding area, but it's tied to an area where we had multiple interests in restricting disturbance kinds of activities. And it's not a complete closure up there. It's just a motorized vehicle during winter closure from the beginning of February to the end of April. And so what we would need here, or anything at all, is that's still, I think, stuff that we have to talk about internally, see what makes the most sense. Ideally, we're trying to protect the needs of the animals in a way that's minimally impacting human beings that also want to go out there and enjoy all those natural values. So if we can do it and facilitate that kind of activity, but in some places and in some contexts, we need to do a little bit more.
Thank you, Scott. Is Elk Foundation, did you want to add anything to that?
So I'll step in again. Because this is a kind of a Central Oregon related question, I do cover Oregon and Washington is in my position. And what I would say is that Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife is more geared to seasonal closures. So they do open their lands right on schedule for shed hunting. And that's become so popular, and people really appreciate that access to hunt shed antlers. And that access continues through the summer. They have a green dot system. So as the questionnaire asked, yes, a green dot system. So it's managed travel access. And then I guess I'll close again to reinforce that this is the least roded, one of the least roded landscapes you're ever going to find. So less than 3/4 of a mile of road per square mile within the Van Wyck property. And you're not going to find that in very many places. And so it provides that combination of really excellent roaded access in where it's appropriate, plus that wilderness feel or unroaded primitive access. And I think for me, that's something that really resonated with Forterra, with our partners with Forterra in building our synergy for this whole project.
Thank you, Bill. Michelle, did you want to add anything to that? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next questions from Kevin. As more important lands are purchased and added to various wildlife areas in their management, how can WDFW keep up with management needs to maintain more lands with limited staff? It's an excellent question. I'm going to take a stab at it. I'm going to let also Cynthia maybe address it a little bit about what we do. But I do want to mention first off is one of the things that we're demonstrating tonight is partnerships. Being able to manage these lands as a single organization on our own is going to be really difficult. So that's why we form partnerships. Michelle talked to stewardship and some work that they're going to engage with us on for this parcel in particular, but probably others as well. Elk Foundation manages a program for habitat restoration. And so partnerships is key. We're pretty creative in finding external sources of funding. The O&M is the challenge, staffing in particular. I want to say this before I let Cynthia say a thing or two, but when we look at these projects, we do what if we don't protect this piece of property type of analysis, and I think that's a really important step that we always look at, and we highlighted the location of this one and how many elk cross it. If we weren't successful in protecting this, and those parcels eventually were to get developed, we would have literally conflict on top of conflict between elk and private land. And the more you get development on the land, the more likely elk are going to get in trouble, which is going to create a lot of work on staff time, enforcement time. It's just a whole slew of work that we'd have to do. So we do look at this, and just the importance of protecting the land is also factored in as far as what would happen if we didn't protect it. And so, Cynthia, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. I just would add that we have been continuing and bolstering our conversation with the legislature in terms of the public investment in these places. And across the state, you know, our lands represent about $1 billion investment by the people of the state of Washington and other places. Like, we do get some federal funding. And it just makes sense that if you're going to invest in those places, that you're also going to invest in taking care of them in perpetuity. And so we've bolstered that conversation with the legislature in terms of every time we put in a grant that gets funded through capital budget, whether it be state funding or even federal funding, the state legislature has to authorize us to actually spend that money. We are now estimating what the long-term O&M funding need is with that. It's a stratified system of estimation, sort of per acre based on population pressure, use pressure, habitat type, infrastructure, load, all of those kinds of things combined into a per acre estimate, customized to the land base, and then that goes into our capital budget request. And we are working to actually use that to increase our base budget on the operating side. So that in the last couple of biennium has been successful, and we are doing our best to fill in what is a significant multi-million-dollar gap in across our land base in our O&M, but continually making the case for the value that we're providing, and like I said, those assets that the public is investing in. And obviously in this case, we're seeing this cross-programmatic partnership, you know, with a lot of different entities really invested in making this happen. And those are the kinds of partnerships that it's going to take to raise the profile and the need associated with taking care of these places in the long term. Thanks,
Cynthia. Any of our partners want to add anything else to this question? Okay.
Mike, I'll jump in. This is Jennifer, and I would just add that, you know, I talked about earlier the Elk Foundation's sort of holistic approach to protecting elk and the future of elk and public access hunters. One of those programs is our habitat program. So in the state of Washington, for instance, this is our largest membership state. So we have nearly 15,000 members in the state of Washington. And we have fundraising events that raise money to put that money back on the ground into landscapes such as this one. So, you know, this property in conjunction with the other properties that make up that large swath, that migration route, we have we've put a lot of funding on the ground to match and leverage your state funding and get more projects done. So enhancing habitat through prescribed burning, we've done spring repair work, you know, seeding work, all sorts of different, you know, habitat enhancement work. I think the most recent one, and Scott may be familiar with it, is a project we're funding in the coming year, which is a meadow restoration project within this migration route. So I hope folks know that that's the beauty of some of these partnerships is you kind of form this lasting legacy, whether you want to or not. You're in it and you're locked in, and you're going to keep leveraging each other in all the ways that that landscape and the public needs you to.
Thanks, Jennifer. I like that. Once you do a project, you're locked in with this, and we're locked in with you. So it's certainly, and you know, both Forterra and Elk Foundation, your members are, you know, the recreating public that the state of Washington serves as well. So we're kind of all connected in that way. So I have a question here. I think it's probably going to be for Scott. I understand the Yakima Elk Herd has declining calf survival and therefore reduced special permit opportunities. Do you think this will help increase the calf survival rate going forward? And
yeah, so so the situation with the Yakima Elk Herd is really not unique. It's the same scenario that's happened with the Yakima Elk Herd and the Mountains Elk Herd, all three big Eastern Washington herds. And it, you know, has to do with the perfect storm of the epic drought of 2015 and then a couple hard winters that followed. Elk normally tough winters out pretty well, but this was one point in time where we saw in all three herds an impact of those weather events in combination. So right now, the biggest problem with the Yakima Elk Herd and getting us back to where we want with recreational opportunity is frankly just the number of elk wombs on the landscape. So the total number of calves that are there to replace adult mortality every year, it's a function of both the calf ratio and the number of cows, right? So calf ratios tend to bounce around a lot in all elk herds, and it's not super easy to predict. It's noisy data, but with kind of the range of historic normal calf ratios, we'll get to where we need to be if we can just get more cows on the landscape. So we needed to cut back the permits and the recreational opportunity on harvesting antlerless elk, just so that we can get back to having the needed number of cows that we need for the kind of total calf recruitment. That help?
I think so. Thank you, Scott. So we have a couple fire questions here. I'm going to roll them into one. And comes from Ed and anonymous, but can you speak to habitat restoration post-fire, particularly in the Weenass wildlife area? And then there's, can you speak to the damages from the Evans Creek fire and how DFW is working proactively to protect land from fire? So on the Evans Canyon fire, we're doing assessments right now. So we had a number of fires across Eastern Washington that some of them started Labor Day and some of them started, Evans Canyon started a week before that. And so we're doing a number of assessments, staff are on the ground trying to ascertain what those impacts are. We will be putting together restoration plans. One of the big things that was impacted right now is fences, and whether it's large, the elk fences, the 8-foot elk fences that we use to keep elk off the private land and crops, or the barbed wire fences between property boundaries. But we're working on a number of those projects. Right now, it's just a matter of assessment and then grants and supplemental requests for the legislature will be put together. I don't know, Kelly, did you want to talk a little bit about how we do the supplemental budget request and what we submitted for just recently as far as that goes, and what else we might need to do to have conversations with the legislature?
Sure. So we just recently upped our second supplemental for this one. But basically, this is a situation where it's hard to predict, and you can't just have that money set aside because the state needs to keep their money working. So we tend to go in after the fact. I've been very successful in demonstrating the cost for that and seeking reimbursement. It's more of a reimbursement situation. We have upped our requests. we're trying to make sure we have enough to cover this, as well as you know, get some in the bank, despite what I started with. And so it's really it's an awkward spot in that you almost have to have the event before you're allowed to put the money away to fix it. So that's how we address it.
Thank you, Kelly. As far as our NGO partners and fire go, you guys have any experience dealing with these, and what would you, what can you provide some examples of how you've worked on fire? And I don't know, Michelle, you in Western Washington, you don't get quite the fires that we have, but any thoughts there?
Unmute myself. I mean, I think it's something that we're all going to have to grapple with on the landscape in Eastern Washington and Western Washington. Our strategy to date has been to find ways to encourage houses to stay closer to infrastructure and further away from wild forest lands, but that's not going to be our cure. You can see that in California. So I think we all are on a learning curve, and yeah, it's going to be challenging times.
Thanks, Michelle. Bill or Jen?
Yeah, I would chime in, Mike, and just suggest, you know, that active management of our landscapes, you know, proactive management of our landscapes to be fire resistant and continue to uphold what the wildlife needs on the landscape is what's vital. So I think all of us on the phone, this partnership here, we're all working at that, and we need to be aggressive, and to be frank, we need that public support as well, to recognize that as an important component to wildfire. And while we have engaged with, you know, reactive measures such as reseeding and stuff where necessary, it's really about the front end and being proactive and continuing the conversation, and both in the short term, what you need in the short term for the landscape, but also what we're going to do about it in the long run.
Thank you, Jennifer. So there's more questions coming in. We're 4 minutes from 8 o'clock. I think we'll keep going for a bit longer here. I'm sorting through these questions. So one that's tied to a question of, does WDFW partner with conservation districts on working lands management? And then there was something similar to that, but why don't we start with that one? I can say locally we have on a number of occasions, particularly in the Yakima area. We've worked with the operator who's on the Van Wyck Ranch to maintain grazing practices on there that fit into WDFW's practices requirements. But I'm gonna pivot over to Cynthia and let her talk a little bit about that partnership as well.
Yeah, so thanks, Mike. We have a lot of great coordination with the conservation districts. We participate in several coordinated resource management groups, the CRMs, throughout the state. Okanogan County, we're working to start one in Astonishing County, Kittitas County, certainly what Mike was speaking of. In Douglas County have done a lot of work there. We've done a lot of work on the State Acres for Wildlife Enhancement SAFE program. And we also have a member who's Mike Cuddle Jr., who sits on the State Conservation Commission board. And then we have a seat on the executive committee of the state CRM. So we're pretty involved, and we're with our partners, our state and federal agency partners, also have been involved in supporting funding for the facilitation of several CRMs throughout the state. It's a really critical partnership that we lean on, and I think there's a statement here that, you know, the conservation districts are the go-to for some of these, you know, for supporting the working lands, and we definitely are working in partnership with them to implement, you know, conservation through working lands and incentives associated with that.
Thank you, Cynthia. Any of our other presenters have any thoughts? I mean, this was directed at DFW, but I know that everybody has opportunities to work with various organizations.
I would just say it's
So,
all about partnership, for sure.
Michelle, so all about partnerships, and go ahead, Bill.
Private lands provide so much habitat, and we can't lose that. And the conservation districts are key to keeping those private landowners engaged. And when we can cross property lines, and so if we fund a project through our project advisory committee, through our habitat stewardship program, if we can partner with NRCS through a conservation district and work on the private lands, that just expands our reach and expands the impact for wildlife. So I can't say enough about our private landowners. We have to keep them on the landscape. If they go, elk country grows houses and we all lose.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Michelle and Cynthia. I'm going to move on to the next one here. So there's a question from Anonymous. For folks who don't serve on the advisory committee, how else can they get directly involved in WDFW public-owned lands to bring local values to management decisions? Well, so let me start by saying, so each wildlife area has a wildlife advisory committee, and we do have members on that, and that would be a place you could start, is to request at a minimum to understand when those meetings are occurring. We do a pretty robust process when we're updating wildlife area plans, and that involves quite a bit of review by the public. And I think that's a good opportunity. Cynthia, you want to add to that, that work?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So certainly the plans themselves and the development of them and engaging in that. And then when we have rule changes or place-based conversations like target shooting on the WNAS, there's opportunities for that. Or, you know, we're right now looking at recreation or recreation strategy across our lands, and there's opportunities there. We're doing, we just closed a SEPA opportunity on our grazing program. But I would say, you know, get in touch with your wildlife area manager and express your interest and, you know, develop a relationship there. We are looking to expand. We don't have a ton of capacity, but our partnering with volunteers and our interest in having a bit more interpretation capacity is something that we are pursuing. And we really do need partners across the board in order to do those things. So I would say, you know, first and foremost, to develop a good relationship with your wildlife area manager, engage in the opportunities that are there, and, you know, just get involved for sure. Just reach out.
Thank you, Cynthia. Next question's for Kelly. And this is this partnership going to be similar to how WDFW partners? It has partnered with Cattlemen's Association and Farm Bureau in the past. And then there's a follow-up to that about do we continue to plan to graze the ranch? But what, you want to take that first part about partnering with Cattlemen's Association and Farm Bureau?
Sure, Mike. I can't say it's, you know, how's this one compare? I can't really compare it because it's going to vary on every project is different. I think I would go back to my original 360 partnership, and that we want to partner with anybody that's interested in providing stewardship on lands. And certainly the Farm Bureau and Cattlemen have been good partners with us in the past, and I look forward to partnering with them in the future. If you've got specifics in mind, give me a call, give Mike a call, and we'll work it out. Again, we're endeavoring to reach a broader audience than our traditional users. I think we've always worked a bit with Cattlemen and Farm Bureau, but I feel that our partnership's growing. And again, we all bring something unique to the table. And so if you got a specific in mind, give us a call. On the specifics of what happens on this ranch, I'm gonna turn it over to the local experts.
Thank you, Kelly. And I will say that the question, does WDFW plan to continue grazing the ranch after the purchase. So the purchase was completed last year, 2019, and we do have a grazer that's got a lease with us. This individual had been grazing that property for a number of years, and it's an agreement where we'll manage that lease in compatibility with Fish and Wildlife, and we have a variety of parameters that we monitor those grazing leases on. We have one rangeland ecologist. He works all over the state, managing and monitoring grazing. But yes, we do have an existing grazing lease out there, and we'll continue that. So there's one other thing I wanted to add here, and and it's tied to that. So when we were working on developing this project, we were talking locally with a number of partners, including the North Yakima Conservation District, and we are working with them on a grant that they were secured through the Conservation Commission, and then some grants that we got through our partnership through the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan that is managed through Department of Ecology, to improve infrastructure and do some stream restoration work on the site. So we're working with North Yakima Conservation District currently to do that work, as well as our partners across the integrated plan. And there was one question about how we were partnering with them. We got two more questions here. So from Anonymous, can you explain how working lands can assist in meeting all partners' goals? How might this be reflected in WDFW's 25-year strategic plan? I think this one, I'm going to let the director answer this one, and then we can give you some backup on that afterward.
Sure, I'm trying to see if I can find a question to get a little bit more. So basically, how do working lands meet our goals? Well, you heard earlier that this particular property we talked about tonight was grazed for 100 years, and we found it to be in incredibly great condition. Done well, it can certainly do that. Working lands, whether we continue working lands on our properties for those values, or we help those that have current working lands stay working lands. You heard Bill talk about if they're not working lands, they become basically areas for houses to grow. And so working lands with proper stewardship are great. I would say tying it to the strategic plan, that's, we're looking at focusing more and more on conservation with the agency and more on these partnerships and increasing that relevancy across the board. So certainly that's the bottom line message here. There's room for everything. If you do it well, we can have working lands, we can have areas set aside, we can absolutely make the same things work, whether they're private working lands or they're grazing on our public lands. So it's an integrated part, and it absolutely is consistent with our 25-year strategic plan. In fact, it's an avenue that we will focus more on as a result of that plan.
Thank you, Kelly. So I was going to ask, going over our partners, how you guys view working lands and working with local communities, and whether it's agriculture or other uses of the land. Michelle, why don't you go ahead first?
Absolutely. Washington's heritage is based on people taking care of the lands that are in their ownership. And so much of the landscape that we enjoy has been well stewarded by people for generations. It's a portfolio. And as Director Susewind said, there are some places where it makes sense for it to be in the public portfolio, and there are a lot of other lands, the majority of lands, that are well stewarded in private stewardship, and supporting private landowners and helping find ways for them to economically keep those lands multi-generationally, or for young farmers or timber landowners to come into that ownership is a key part of our values.
Thanks, Michelle. How about Elk Foundation?
Mike, I'll start, and I'll let Bill chime in here, but I would just echo what Michelle said. I think that you know, it takes the variety of ownership patterns in order to be successful. And those are the partnerships that we have to garner, and we have to steward, and we have to build that trust with timber companies, with private traditional ranchers, non-traditional ranchers, you know, the absentee landowner as well. All those ownerships are vital to being successful. And, you know, public ownership, fee title, public ownership isn't always the answer, but certainly sometimes it does make the most sense. And so I hope people understand that those are critical conversations that need to be had, and we need to hear people's thoughts on it. But those are conversations that we take seriously. And I remember in the beginning of this project, being on a conference call with you, Mike, and Michelle, and Bill, and kind of talking about what this family's legacy is, what their wishes were in the future for the public to enjoy, and for the wildlife to be able to enjoy this property. So taking into account that local community, but also that regional focus in Washington is absolutely critical to our strategic plan as well, and to the success of projects like this. And Bill, you may have more to add on that in the local regional level.
Just, I want to point something out, and I think it gets overlooked a lot, but grazing can really help wildlife. And particularly with elk aren't going to eat decadent, overgrown grass that's senesced and is just standing there dead on the stem. Cows will eat that. Elk depend on that fresh flush of forage following grazing. So when you're doing that in concert, you can have really strong wildlife populations and really strong agriculture, and they work together. And if you take one piece away, you might miss a lot of the puzzle there. So that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Jen. So let's see, we have, I'm looking at our questions here. We have one more question. It comes from Larry. It's probably actually the easiest question of the night, and I love it. Is access to this area open now? And the answer is yes. Property's open. You can drive through there, take the Kaiwichi Mill Road up, and you can park, as Bill said, most of it's roadless. I mean, there's the main road that runs through the property, but you can park and hike out, go hunting, The Kaiwichi Creek is just absolutely beautiful this time of year. The oaks are changing colors, so yep, it's available. That's the end of our questions. We wanted to point out that this video will be available on our YouTube channel, hopefully by the end of tomorrow. And you can link our YouTube page is available for, link to our YouTube page is available from department homepage. So go to our homepage and you can find the link for tonight's event. With that, I think I just want to really thank our partners for joining us tonight. It was great to relive this project a bit more with you all. It was a long project, and as we had identified, we'd been trying to secure it for a number of years, and it's just fantastic that we finally did. I really appreciate Elk Foundation for Forterra's partnership and getting it across the finish line. We look forward to helping with the help on stewardship, whether it's through habitat grants and local fundraising. But we are really excited about this project as well as others to come in the future. I wanted to thank all the staff, Scott and Cynthia, for answering the questions. Paul, we didn't get a fish question, but you know, this was about land conservation, but I really appreciate you being on the line to bail us out if we got one of those. Kelly, I'm gonna let you wrap it up with a few closing comments, and then we'll close.
Sure, Mike, thank you. Again, thanks to our partners. I think this is a great example of what can be accomplished. I think you heard it loud and clear. We need all types on the landscape as long as we're doing it in responsible manners. I would say if there are questions that we didn't get to or missed, or you think of them later, shoot us an email. You can shoot an email to director at wdfw.wa.gov, and we'll get answers to those questions sent back to you directly. Otherwise, thanks everybody for tuning in, and thanks to our partners for being here tonight and being with us for decades in the past, and now we're all locked in together for decades into the future. Thank you.